The USDA says it will not tap into a contingency fund to pay for SNAP benefits because they say that's reserved for things like natural disasters.
In 1965, CBS fired Eric Fleming and 4 other Rawhide stars in a single summer. They promoted Clint Eastwood to lead, but refused to give him a raise. Just 13 episodes later, the show was dead. But here's what nobody talks about. Fleming and Eastwood hated each other so much they nearly fought behind a fence in Arizona. The producer called Fleming a miserable human being and used fake screen tests to scare him. 6 weeks after his firing, Fleming drowned in Peru. His body was donated to a medical school and buried in an unmarked grave. This is the story CBS never wanted you to hear. Charles Marquis Warren didn't just stumble into Rawhide. He built it like a master architect, pulling blueprints from 3 very different buildings and welding them into something America hadn't seen before. One of his key inspirations was his own film Cattle Empire from 1958, where Joel McCrea led a post-Civil War cattle drive. That film was rough and dusty and set the tone for what Rawhide would eventually become. But that wasn't enough. Warren unearthed a gold mine most producers would have overlooked, a forgotten 1866 cattle drive diary by George C. Duffield, buried in the annals of Iowa since 1924. Duffield didn't romanticize the trail. He described stampedes that didn't stop, deadly river crossings, even the drowning of a cowboy named Carr in the Red River. It was raw, and that's exactly what Warren wanted. And then came his ace card, his time on Gunsmoke. He didn't just work on it. He produced the entire first season and directed the first 26 episodes. CBS paid him $7,000 a week to do it. That credibility made Rawhide more than a pitch. It was a promise. In 1959, network television was drowning in westerns. 30 of them dominated primetime. 8 of the top 10 shows were gunslinging, saddle-riding dramas. Every network wanted a piece of the cowboy gold rush. CBS had already scored with Gunsmoke, but they wanted more. Warren's idea stood out because it wasn't rooted, it moved. While other shows parked their sheriffs and ranchers in one town, Rawhide pushed forward across hostile terrain, episode after episode. He sold the idea of realism: water shortages, stampedes, anthrax, native land tolls, bandits, and he had the Duffield Diary to prove it. It wasn't just a western, it was a survival story with hooves. At first, Warren wanted to call it Cattle Drive. In a sea of titles like Gunsmoke, Bonanza, and Maverick, his show needed teeth, so he changed it to Rawhide. That word hit hard. It cracked like a whip and stuck in your memory. It wasn't just branding, it was a threat. You'd hear it once and know you were in for something rough, and the title worked. Rawhide premiered on January 9, 1959, and shot into the Nielsen Top 20 right out of the gate. When CBS executives saw Warren's name attached to Rawhide, they didn't hesitate. This was the guy who had turned a radio drama into Gunsmoke, the #1 show in America. His vision didn't just work, it transformed television. Even though he left Gunsmoke mid-second season after clashing with co-producer Norman Macdonald, his fingerprints were all over its success. When he pitched Rawhide, the network didn't need convincing. They remembered what he did in 1955, and they wanted it again. Eric Fleming wasn't always the rugged face of Gil Favor. In fact, in 1942, he almost lost that face. As a 17-year-old Navy Seabee during World War II, Fleming made a stupid bet. He tried to lift a 200-pound weight and failed catastrophically. It smashed his face, breaking his forehead, jaw, and nose. He underwent major reconstructive surgery. Ironically, the same accident that could have destroyed his life gave him the hardened, striking features that would later land him the lead in Rawhide. He called it a wonderful balance of values. That injury made him look like the kind of man who could lead 3,000 cattle across untamed land. Clint Eastwood didn't win his role through Polish. When he auditioned in 1958, the script required him to storm into frame and blow up in anger at nobody. Problem was, he didn't memorize the lines. Instead of backing out, he made a bold choice. He ran in and improvised the whole scene, yelling in raw emotion without saying any of the actual dialogue. The room went silent. Producer Charles Marcus Warren stared at him like he was nuts. Eastwood thought he blew it. He went home and told his wife he lost the role. She smiled and said he'd get it, and she was right. They picked him for the authenticity. His improvisation beat every word-perfect performance. But behind the camera, Warren was ruthless. During season 1, he secretly brought in actor Gregory Walcott and gave him a screen test. What Walcott didn't know was that the test wasn't for a role, it was leverage. Warren was sick of Eric Fleming's constant complaints and wanted a bargaining chip. He used Walcott as a silent threat to replace him, never intending to actually hire him. It was pure manipulation, the kind that defined 1950s Hollywood. Warren eventually left the show in 1961, chasing new projects like Gunslinger, which flopped, and The Virginian. Clint Eastwood might have won the part of Rowdy Yates, but he hated the character from day one. At 28, he was cast as an impulsive teenager. The idiot of the plains, he called it. He resented the juvenile writing. He wanted grit, not goofiness. Even his co-star, Paul Breingar, said Eastwood was very unhappy playing someone so young and naive. That tension eventually led Eastwood to accept Sergio Leone's invitation to Italy in 1964. He wanted to be taken seriously, and spaghetti westerns gave him that chance. Tensions on set weren't limited to the script. Fleming and Eastwood clashed hard. According to multiple cast and crew members, they outright hated each other. Some even claimed they got into a fist fight during filming. Warren called Fleming a colossal egotist. Most of the crew disliked him. After Fleming's death in 1966, he drowned in Peru's Huallaga River during a film shoot. Eastwood publicly softened. He denied the fight ever happened. Maybe it was respect. Maybe guilt, maybe just Hollywood smoothing out the edges. When Rawhide hit the air in January 1959, it wasn't supposed to be a juggernaut, it was a mid-season replacement. But by the end of its first run in July, just 23 episodes in, it was the 18th most-watched show in America. CBS had a hit, and by the 1960-61 season, it hit its peak, number 6 in the Nielsen ratings, right behind Gunsmoke and Wagon Train. Rawhide was reaching 12 million households every Friday night. It lasted 8 seasons, 217 episodes, all in black and white. What made it different wasn't just the action, it was the authenticity. Fleming's Gil Favor wasn't just a cowboy, he was a man shaped by history. His character was modeled directly on George C. Duffield, the real cattleman whose 1866 diary gave the show its backbone. That diary-inspired realism showed up in every episode, even in Fleming's monologues, which mirrored trail journal entries. Fleming wasn't just acting, he was channeling history, and he wrote 2 episodes himself, showing how invested he was in the story. While other westerns played it safe, Rawhide tackled subjects that pushed boundaries. One episode had Robert Culp as a morphine-addicted ex-soldier. Another showed racism head-on through the character Jesus. There were stories about Confederate loyalists trying to start a new rebellion, quarantines over anthrax fears, and native tribes negotiating land passage by demanding cattle. It wasn't clean, it wasn't nice, it was real. In 1958, Sheb Wooley was riding 2 wild horses at once. On one side, a goofy novelty song called The Purple People Eater had exploded across radios, staying at number 1 for 6 straight weeks and selling over 3 million copies. It was never supposed to be a hit. He'd only played it for MGM execs after his serious ballads were ignored. Most of them laughed it off, except 2 men in the room. One was the president, the other was the head of A&R. That was all he needed. While the world danced to his bizarre one-eyed alien anthem, Wooley was quietly filming the role of Pete Nolan on Rawhide, a gritty Western series that would become iconic in its own right. When Rawhide premiered in January 1959, Wooley was already a national sensation, earning more from one novelty song than most actors made in a season. But the money wasn't the most interesting part, not even close. Hidden behind the cowboy hat and easy smile was a secret that would echo through Hollywood for decades. Back in 1951, while working on the film Distant Drums, Wooley recorded a single scream, raw, terrified, unforgettable. It was labeled "Man Being Eaten by Alligator" and tossed into a sound archive. Nobody knew then that this scream would be used in Star Wars, Indiana Jones, The Lord of the Rings, and over 400 other films. It would become Hollywood's most famous sound effect, the Wilhelm scream, and nobody knew it was Sheb Wooley's voice. He didn't get a credit. He didn't need one. Years later, His widow confirmed the rumor. He'd always joked about being good at dying on screen. While America saw him as a rugged trail scout, riding alongside Clint Eastwood and Eric Fleming, Sheb Wooley was also tearing up the country music charts. In March 1962, That's My Pa hit #1 on Billboard's Hot Country and Western sides. It stayed on the charts for 17 weeks and even cracked the Hot 100. For a man who'd already topped pop charts with a flying purple monster, this was a second act most artists could only dream of. He was filming long hours on Rawhide and still had the energy to reinvent himself as a legitimate country star. Not many could straddle two entertainment worlds at once. He did it without flinching. And then came Hee Haw. In 1969, Wooley wrote the theme song for a new country comedy variety show that no one expected to last. He brought in the town and country singers, soon renamed the Nashville Edition, to record the theme. The show would run for 25 years. Wooley wasn't just behind the music. He joined the cast from day one, playing regular comedy sketches and appearing as his drunken alter ego, Ben Colder. What started as a silly joke character turned into a touring act and multiple albums. Most actors fade after one hit. Wooley kept building new ones: serious cowboy, comedy star, hit songwriter, all at once. And he wasn't pretending to be a cowboy. He was one. Raised on a farm in Eric, Oklahoma, he was riding bulls and roping cattle long before there was any camera pointed his way. As a teenager, he was already working the professional rodeo circuit, getting thrown, bruised, and busted up for real. When World War II began, he tried to enlist but was rejected. Classified 4F because of injuries from rodeo life, so he worked in munitions factories instead. All those scars made it into Rawhide, stitched quietly into the way he held a saddle or shot a rifle. You can't fake that kind of grit. But Rawhide wasn't just cattle drives and desert dust. On January 27, 1961, the show aired one of the most daring TV episodes of its time, Incident at the Top of the World. Robert Culp played a Civil War veteran battling morphine addiction, a topic so taboo that CBS nearly pulled the plug. America had never seen drug withdrawal portrayed this way before, especially not on a family show. Viewers gave it an 8.1 rating, shocked but riveted. It wasn't just a Western anymore, it was social commentary, disguised in cowboy boots. And they weren't done pushing boundaries. Just 3 weeks earlier, on January 6th, Rawhide aired Incident of the Buffalo Soldier, starring Woody Strode as Corporal Gabe Washington. It wasn't just about racism, it was about double-edged racism. Washington faced discrimination from white soldiers and suspicion from black ones. The story ended with his tragic death, shot by white troopers who didn't understand what he was trying to do. It was 1961. The civil rights movement was in full swing. CBS was terrified Southern audiences would boycott. Instead, the episode was studied years later by universities for its layered portrayal of a man caught between two worlds, and that risk paid off. By the 1960-61 season, Rawhide was one of the top 6 shows in America, pulling a 27.5 Nielsen rating. Gunsmoke was #1. Wagon Train was #2. Rawhide stood shoulder to shoulder with giants, even while dealing with themes others avoided, like Incident of the Slave Master, where a Union widow kills a former Confederate officer who ran a brutal prison, or Incident on the Edge of Madness, where a delusional former general tries to create a new Confederate army in Panama. These episodes weren't just controversial, they were daring to peel open old wounds while most of TV pretended they didn't exist. And it didn't stop with race or war. It reached gender politics, too. In March 1962, A Woman's Place, written by lead actor Eric Fleming, portrayed a woman challenging the brutal male hierarchy of the trail. She wasn't the love interest, she was a threat to the system. By November 1965, another episode, Clash at Broken Bluff, had a widow leading a suffragette rebellion against corrupt saloon owners. The men were bribed with free beer and gear if they voted against women's rights. Some did, some didn't, but it forced the audience to pick a side. And that wasn't common in 1960s television. These weren't safe stories, they were powder kegs. From day one, Fleming's presence dominated the set. He wasn't just the star, he was the storm cloud that hovered over every scene. Behind closed doors, Producer Charles Marquise Warren couldn't hide his disgust. He once called Fleming a miserable human being, and not just because of his performance. The man picked apart every script, every decision. Warren snapped. In a move that blurred the line between strategy and cruelty, he invited actor Gregory Walcott to do fake screen tests, pretending he might replace Fleming. The truth? It was all theater. Walcott was never going to get the part. Warren just wanted Fleming to sweat. Years later, Walcott admitted the sting never went away, especially after Warren laughed about the whole charade. Fleming may have been raking in $220,000 a year by 1965, an enormous sum for TV at the time, but money didn't soften his edges. It only fueled the tension, which reached a boiling point before a single episode had even aired. During that hot summer of 1958 in Arizona, the cameras hadn't started rolling when Fleming and a young Clint Eastwood nearly threw punches. Their argument escalated so quickly, they stepped behind a fence to settle it like cowboys. Fleming, taller and volatile, later admitted he backed off, not out of fear, but calculation. "Clint would have killed me," he said. They postponed the fight. It never happened, but the air never cleared either. That moment set the tone. Hostility just under the surface, waiting to flare. The crew felt it too. Paul Breingar, who played the cook Wishbone, kept his head down and mouth shut. He'd seen the damage Fleming's constant grumbling caused. Every day on set felt like walking through a minefield. Breingar had a strategy. Get in, do the work fast, get out. Finish a week's worth of scenes in a couple of days if possible. He wasn't the star, and thank God for that. Meanwhile, Sheb Woolley, the scout Pete Nolan, bonded closely with Breingar. Their friendship became a shield from the madness. But when Woolley left in 1962 after 102 episodes, something cracked. The support system frayed, and yet Fleming kept threatening to quit, his moods swinging like a gate in a windstorm. For Clint Eastwood, it was more than just the tension. It was the role itself. He was 28. But CBS forced him to play Rowdy Yates like a teenager, the idiot of the plains, he called him. Eastwood was simmering under that hat. Breingar remembered how much Clint hated being cast as a kid. In 1961, the producers tried easing the tension by alternating lead roles between Fleming and Eastwood. It helped a little, but not enough. By the time Fleming was fired in 1965, Eastwood finally got his promotion to trail boss. But it was too late. The show crumbled without its original gruff center. CBS pulled the plug after just 13 episodes of the final season. The man who replaced Fleming couldn't save Rawhide. Not even Eastwood could. The truth is, Rawhide had been bleeding for years. At its peak, it sat proudly at number 6 in the Nielsen ratings. That was 1960 to 1961, but by the very next year, it had fallen to 13th place. Then 22nd, then 44th. The fall was brutal. 38 spots in just 3 years. Scripts were stale. Viewers tuned out. Friday nights weren't what they used to be. Producers came and went like tumbleweeds. Warren left after season 3. His replacement, Andre Bohem, tried to keep the ship afloat for season 4, but was soon replaced too. Vincent Fennelly took over for seasons 5 and 6. Then Bruce Geller and Bernard Kowalski came in, only to be fired halfway through season 7. And then Bohem returned. It was chaos. One week, it was about action. The next, about family drama. Should they focus on cattle drives or guest stars? Nobody knew. With every new producer came new orders, and a little more of the show's soul disappeared. Then came CBS's death blow. They moved Rawhide from its loyal Friday 7:30 p.m. slot to Tuesday nights in September 1965. That one decision shattered its audience. The show had thrived on consistency. Viewers were used to starting their weekends with Gil Favor and Rowdy Yates. Now they couldn't even find them. Just 3 months later, the series aired its final episode. The remaining 13 episodes from season 8 limped across the screen, a far cry from season 7's 30-episode lineup. The show was finished. January 4th, 1966 marked the last rerun. Behind the scenes, CBS was reimagining itself. Expensive westerns were out. Cheap sitcoms were in. The Beverly Hillbillies had become a phenomenon. The Andy Griffith Show was cheaper and pulled bigger numbers. It was all part of what would later be called the rural purge. Rawhide didn't fit anymore. It was a relic. Costs were rising fast. The Virginian cost $330,000 per episode. Even Wagon Train ran $100,000. Rawhide couldn't keep up. Enter Robert Thompson in season 8. With one job, slash costs. His solution? Fire the expensive ones. Fleming was gone. So were Sheb Woolley, James Murdoch, Robert Cabal, and Rocky Shahan. In came Raymond St. Jacques and David Watson, two total strangers to the Western world. Viewers were confused. The chemistry was broken. Clint Eastwood, now 35, was promoted to lead, but CBS didn't give him a raise. He'd earned $750 per episode at the start. That hadn't changed. His reaction? "Why should I be pleased?" he told TV Guide. He was carrying the whole show now, for the same money. But Clint had already filmed a fistful of dollars, and for a few dollars more. He knew what was coming. His career was about to leave television behind. Eric Fleming landed in Lima on August 17, 1966, chasing one last shot at redemption. Fired from Rawhide despite earning $200,000 in his first year, the 41-year-old actor had just lost the role that made him a household name. CBS wanted to cut costs, and Fleming, who played trail boss Gil Favor for 217 episodes, was simply too expensive. Now, here he was, deep in the Peruvian jungle, 4 hours by bus from the nearest trace of civilization, trying to film High Jungle, a two-part story that MGM hoped to spin into a European theatrical release. It was a gamble. The jungle was real. The dangers weren't staged. And this wasn't Hollywood. Fleming had planned to marry Lynn Garber, Miss Pennsylvania of 1962, just days before leaving. They'd been inseparable since 1963. That marriage never happened. 6 weeks into the shoot, on September 28th, the rapids of the Hualaga River became the set. Fleming and his co-star, Greek actor Nico Minardos, climbed into a carved-out dugout canoe, nothing more than a hollowed tree, and pushed off into the current. The waters were fierce, but this was the climax. Fleming, an experienced surfer and swimmer, made a decision that would end his life. Instead of staying with the canoe as instructed, he dove into the water, aiming to swim to shore. The canoe flipped. Minardos was tossed and barely managed to survive. Fleming wasn't so lucky. A local man jumped in and grabbed his hair, trying to save him, but the river's pull was too strong. Fleming vanished into the froth, pulled beneath the surface just 220 miles northeast of Lima. Days passed, 3 or 4. The crew was already gone, flown back to Lima, and then to Los Angeles. When the local villagers finally found his body, it had been battered by the river, the condition officially listed as drowned and mutilated. No cast, no crew, no funeral rites, just the jungle and a lifeless form pulled from the current. By October, MGM pulled the plug on High Jungle. No one would ever see the footage. The cost of trying to save a career was a life. But the story didn't end there. According to a coroner's report published in Caritas magazine decades later, Fleming's body was donated to a medical school in Lima, San Fernando, at the University of San Marcos. It was used for study, then cremated. The ashes, it's believed, were buried in a common grave at Presbítero Maestro Cemetery. Fleming's will had said he wanted his body and eyes donated to UCLA, but the jungle had no paperwork. No headstone marks his name. No shrine remembers the 6'3" star who needed 4 plastic surgeries to rebuild his face after a wartime accident, who then became one of the most recognizable men on American television. He disappeared into the river and then into silence. Back in the U.S., Rawhide collapsed without him. CBS had fired not just Fleming, but also Sheb Woolley, James Murdoch, Robert Cabal, and Rocky Shahan, all during the summer of 1965. The network promoted Clint Eastwood to lead and brought in 2 newcomers, Raymond St. Jacques and David Watson. Season 8 was gutted, just 13 episodes compared to 30 the season before, a 57% drop. Viewers weren't fooled. Ratings nosedived. The new title sequence traded real cowboys for cartoon sketches. Writers tried to shift focus entirely to Rowdy Yates, but even Eastwood wasn't buying it. "Why should I be pleased?" he told TV Guide. "I used to carry half the shows. Now I carry them all, for the same money." The last episode, Crossing at White Feather, aired December 7, 1965. No announcement, no farewell, just another Tuesday night Western. One more episode aired in January, but it was a rerun. The time slot went to Daktari, a family-friendly show about African wildlife. A cross-eyed lion named Clarence, a chimp named Judy. Daktari soared to the Nielsen Top 10 in its second season. Rawhide was done.